everybody, Jonathan here with cameraman Todd.
How's everyone doing?
And we're doing a vlog today about side mount tank trim.
Tank trim?
Tank trim.
I'm not sure I know what that is.
Well, you know, we are uniquely qualified to talk about this because
We are great as an example
of how to do it wrong.
That's true.
We are really bad at it.
Yes.
But I mean, we do a little bit have an excuse, but we are really kind of bad at it. At least we were honest. So what is tank trim? So when you're diving side mount, let's have a little example here. When you're diving side mount, if you have good tank trim, your tanks are nice and parallel to your body, like this. And they don't float up, they don't sink down, and they stay nice and tight out of the way. And that is a pretty good example.
That is very good trim.
It's not bad.
Wow.
It occasionally happens.
This might be a short blog then. Look how excellent that is.
Yeah, it might be. But no. Let's show another example. Let's show. Now, I'd like to point out that that's you. Not that I don't have shots that look just like that of me, but.
Yeah.
So this was diving in, I think, in Aralito.
Aralito.
And it was the first time we were diving with aluminums, and we discovered a little problem that makes them different. So in order to talk about that, let's back up a little bit. And let's talk about when Todd and I learned side mount.
The days with Brian.
I think it's Brian's fault. I think this is all your fault, Brian.
A lot of things are Brian's fault, I found.
Yeah, the fact that we're cave divers, that's his fault. All right, so let's have the next one. So this is me and Brian, and this was shot by Todd.
And the Crystal Caves of Abaco.
Yeah, and this is where we learned side mount. I got cave certified from Brian. Todd and I both got side mount
christened at the
I don't
same
know
time.
if it's certified, but he taught us.
Yeah.
And we did all of our training with steel LP85. So that means a low pressure 85 cubic foot
Steel
tank. And it's cave filled, so they overfill them and they're really heavy.
They're heavy.
And they have a lot of gas in them. Now, a lot of people don't understand that a scuba tank actually changes its buoyancy and actually gets heavier when you fill it.
That's right.
You're a chemist. Tell them about the mass of air.
Well, so, you know, air weighs something, right? Like atmospheric pressure is just about 14 pounds per square inch. When you squeeze all that air into a small volume like that, it's going to affect the matter that's inside. I mean, there's oxygen and nitrogen there. That has a mass, that has weight. The more you put in there, even though you're compressing it as a gas, it's still going to have weight to it.
So your typical scuba tank changes its weight by, what, like 6 or 7 pounds?
Yeah, it's significant.
From full to empty. So it's not a lot, but it's significant.
Yes, and it certainly affects the buoyancy characteristics of the tank, like how much it floats, how much it sinks. And the different volume, the different size tanks all have different characteristics. And that'll affect how much, if you have a weight belt, how much lead do you need, if you need any.
So yeah, I mean, for example, when you're first learning to dive and you have to figure out how much weight you're going to wear with the wetsuit that you like or whatever, you have to remember that at the end of the dive, your tank is lighter and it floats more.
Yep.
And since a lot of people learn with the basic scuba tank is aluminum. And the thing that's interesting about aluminum tanks is they change buoyancy the same as a steel tank, except that aluminum tanks, when they're full, they're negative.
Yes.
And when they're empty, they're positive. So
positive.
they actually float. If you take an empty aluminum 80 cubic foot aluminum tank, and it's got no pressure in it, it's just at atmospheric pressure, and you throw it in the ocean, it will float. It does not sink.
And it'll float backside up.
That's right. The
Because
valve
the
is
valve
heavy.
is heavy, yeah.
So the valve hangs down like a pendulum, and the butt of the tank, bloop, sticks up. So when you fill that tank to 3,000 psi to go diving, it's negative, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 pounds, 3 pounds, I forget.
Yeah,
but it's negative. It'll if you throw it in the ocean, it'll sink. But then throughout the dive, as you breathe it down, it gets floatier and floatier. And so you have to have enough weight on your weight belt so that at the end of the dive, when you're doing your safety stop at 10 feet, you're not fighting to stay underwater.
And each one will be, for an aluminum 80, it'll be 4 or 5 pounds positive at the end, floating out.
Right, so now side mount, we double that problem, right?
Yes.
Now we have 2 of them. So this is the thing. So back to our story, when Todd and I learned side mount, we learned on steel tanks. And the thing about steel tanks, they do change their buoyancy just like an aluminum tank does, but they never become positive. They go from super negative to less
negative.
super negative.
Yeah.
So they're still negative. They never want to float. And so when it's a great tank to learn side mount because you never deal with the tanks getting floaty.
Yeah.
Your entire buoyancy will become less as the tanks are breathed down, but the tanks themselves always are hanging off of you. You have them clipped on, and they're negative, so they hang.
Weight wants to go to the bottom, right?
And so you just have to clip them and get them set so that when you're in a horizontal body position, cave diving trim, they stay parallel. Because if the little leashes on the back that clip are too long, they hang.
And that's part of it. Because if it's the steel tanks, we put those leashes down further so they get a little more to reach. Aluminum, we got to move them up, and then that affects the length. The length of the leash becomes more of a problem.
So what's a really funny story to tell is the first time we went side mount diving with aluminum tanks. So we had we knew this stuff, but like in the back of our heads, but nobody had really walked us through it, right? So we did the typical thing we do with Blue World, right? We show up at a dive site and, at 8 in the morning, we're gonna dive a cave that we've never seen before.
Yeah.
We're going with a local expert.
Having arrived the night before.
And we find out what gear we're gonna have because we don't fly with scuba tanks. We show up and we gotta use what's available. Yeah. So we show up in Mexico, we're gonna dive this cave. Christine Lowe, who's our guide, she shows up with aluminum tanks, doesn't think anything of it because, she dives in Mexico. Everybody dives aluminum tanks in Mexico. She just assumes we know what to do with an aluminum tank.
We told her we knew how to side mount.
We didn't.
Which we did.
No.
We knew how to side mount.
Not with aluminums.
Not with aluminum.
So let's see the aluminum.
How does that look?
Yeah, that's me. That's me. So, what they do in Mexico to deal with the fact that as you breathe the aluminum 80s down, the back end gets floaty. They have extra D-rings on their waist belt, and as they get floaty, they clip them, and they move the clips throughout the dive. So, when you start to feel them floating up a little too much, you go, aha, and you just grab the little clip, and you go, boop, and you move it. Boop. And we didn't know about that, and we didn't even have the clips to clip them to, like on our rigs. Like we had them clipped the way as if they were steels, which would be fine at the beginning of the dive. We go in at the beginning of the dive, they're heavy, they're sinking down, they're doing exactly what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And then by about halfway through the dive, I turn and I look at Todd. His tanks are going like this,
up by the ceiling.
And then I was like, that guy looks so dumb. And then I noticed, oh, mine look exactly the same.
Just can't help it.
So that was good. Yeah. And then we come back and we have to make this episode, and we're like, how are we going to edit this episode so nobody notices our tank trim? Well, if you watch that episode, we used a lot of shots of ourselves from early in the dive and not too many from later in the dive. Yeah.
We learn as we go.
Yep, we learn as we go. Okay, so what do we got for the next image? So tell them about this one.
This is Portugal.
Yes.
So we showed up in Portugal. We had aluminum tanks, and we had dry suits, which is another big buoyancy change. So we didn't know how much weight we were going to need. So we kind of do a little ballpark math and figured it was 16 to 18 pounds-ish. But with the X-Deeps, you can only throw so much weight in the spine, which is a good place to put weight because it's nice and even across the body. It's not going to tilt your head up or your butt one way or the other. So we decided we'd throw the weights on the bottom of the tank to help keep the aluminum tanks down and act more like steel tanks. And that's how it worked, which is not well. They're pointing down now.
It was a little bit too much weight on the tank. We were just trying to make it easier on our backs.
Yes.
Put some of the weight in the tanks.
And I think this was earlier in the dive, though. This wasn't at the end, was it?
No, I think that is earlier in the dive. They
Yeah.
actually, I feel like our tank trim was actually awesome by the end.
Yeah, by the end, I think it had nailed it. It worked. It's just at the beginning.
Evened out. But at the
Yeah.
beginning, they were like dragging, and we're like, ooh, those don't look good either. So it's interesting because, I'll hold that part till we get to the next one. I have a funny story here. So, all right, so the next one. So then
Rebreathers.
we got into rebreathers.
Buoyancy is very different.
Very different. And so when we trained on the rebreathers, you don't, especially where we were doing our training in Jackson Blue, you don't need a ton of bailout gas. So instead of using big 80 cubic foot cylinders, we used these LP50s, which are awesome.
Small.
Oh, I love them.
They're svelte.
They're only about this big around, they're about this long, and they're LP50s, which means they're 50 cubic feet of gas when they're filled to their normal fill pressure. But of course, we're cave divers, we overfill them by a ridiculous amount. So they're actually 80s, pretty much.
Yeah, pretty close.
But they're much smaller. But because they are much smaller, they have less gas, and they still have pretty thick walls. So they're actually pretty heavy. So they're very easy to control because they stay negative the whole dive. But they're not as heavy as an LP85.
Well, and with the rebreather, you're not using much gas. So the buoyancy change isn't going to happen much unless you bail out.
Right. So when we learned this, Ed and Mehdi got everything just set up perfectly on the rebreathers. We had it down. But again, we were diving repeatedly
The LP50s
with
day
the
after
same
day.
gear day after day after day.
Yep.
It wasn't like, we show up and we find out what we're diving today, like right now, and we have to do it and make an episode.
Yeah.
And that's the problem that we have a lot of the time, is just we show up and we don't know what we're going to be even diving. So
And it's usually one shot. Like we got, there's one dive, it's happening today. You get whatever tanks you got to figure your trim out on the fly.
So here's what we've learned. You've got 3 different thicknesses of wetsuit plus a dry suit. That's 4 different buoyancy combinations in your exposure protection.
Yes.
Then you've got the buoyancy issues between open circuit and rebreather. So there's 2 to go with those 4. You've got these 2. And then there's at least 2 more, which is steel or aluminum tanks.
Yeah.
Okay? Even if we don't talk about the different types of steel and aluminum, just steel and aluminum, very big. So that's 4 times 2 times 2. That's 16 combinations of buoyancy problems.
It's a lot. And we got to, work that all. But you're forgetting 2 others.
What's the others?
Well, there's salt water and fresh water. So now we're at 32.
Now we're at 32 combinations. And so it's very difficult.
Yes. And you show up in the morning and you start trying to figure it out.
So obviously, if you dive the same configuration all the time, you get pretty good at it.
Yeah, as we can see by the people in Mexico.
Yeah. And they're sticklers for this kind of stuff.
Sticklers for trim. Christine was She was
mortified at us.
Mortified.
Yes.
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 That's a good way to put it.
Our trim was bad. They are sticklers for trim, but we don't want to say anything against Mexico. We love Mexican cave diving, but your cave diving is really easy. There's no current. It's not deep.
Clear water, warm water.
Crystal clear. Like, you don't have anything else to worry about.
Yes. So they work on their trim.
Yeah, of course you're good at your trim. Yeah. All right, I'm sorry. I just had to say that. Don't be mad at us. We're going to come back and dive Mexico. We love Mexico diving.
It's wonderful.
Mexico cave diving is the best.
It is.
And one of the reasons it's the best is because it's easy. Okay, so let's keep going. We have another picture here. So here we are. In the Grand Traverse with Gus and Woody, and we're on rebreathers, and Todd's tanks are hanging down. And now you're going to ask, why? So these are aluminum tanks, and we were new to rebreathers, and we forgot. We were thinking they're going to get light and they're going to float, but we forgot we're on rebreathers. They're never going to get light. You don't use hardly any
unless you bail out.
Unless you bail out.
Yeah.
In which case you don't care about the trim.
Yeah.
But I mean, we were just thinking, they're aluminums. We have to rig them like aluminums. We have to pull them down.
Well, I'm noticing these aren't even our normal bands either, right?
No,
so
those
these
just
already had the bands.
Those just happen to be the bands that
that were already on the tank.
That were already on the tank. Yeah. So we could have done better with that. But so then you have to remember that you've got this mindset of what are the tanks going to do when they're full and what are they going to do when they're empty.
Yep.
But if they're bailouts on your rebreather, 90% of the time they're never going to get empty. They're just going to stay full. And so now you need to know, what am I going to do with them if they do get empty, but they probably won't get empty. Mostly they're just going to be full. And so it's a learning curve. So in any case,
We're getting there.
we're getting there.
We certainly have a broad spectrum of variability, but we have more experience now than probably most of those divers. If you take the Mexican divers and you threw them up in the North Atlantic and threw them in a dry suit, and I think they'd have some buoyancy issues.
They might. The other thing is that when you're filming, your trim is never going to be perfect, because there's no way to film in an upward angle and keep a perfect cave trim where you're horizontal and your hands are out and your feet are up. You kind of can't. Sometimes your body has to contort to get shots. So I don't even try to have beautiful cave diver trim. I'd much rather get a good shot than look good.
It's about the shots. If the shots look good, we look good. That's the way we want to look good.
That's the way we want to look good, yeah. So in any case, if you guys have any questions about side mount trim, I'd say leave them in the comments, or a better plan would be just to ask Gus and Woody. That'd probably be better.
That's one way to
if
do
you
it.
want to leave, if you want to leave a comment and a question for us, we'll see if we can answer it. And if we can't, as always, we'll ask somebody smarter. So that is it for our vlog today. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you soon here at the Blue HQ.
Bye now.
Hey everyone! Thanks for watching our latest episode all the way to the end. Hit that subscribe button now so you won't miss our next episode.